Good morning, everyone. It looks like we have a really excellent turnout so far. Welcome to our informational webinar about SWEEP grants. I think that you'll find that the next hour of your life will prove to be valuable to you. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I hope you get a lot out of it. I truly believe you will. My name is Kendall Barton. I'm the marketing manager for Tule. We also have Ian Vietti from Innovative Ag Services. He's going to take up the brunt of this webinar because he's going to tell everyone all about SWEEP, kind of the history of it, what's going on now. There have been quite a few changes this year, so he'll update us all on that and also give some tips and tricks on how to apply for the SWEEP grant successfully and improve your odds. After Ian's finished, I'll jump back on to talk about two different technologies that are eligible for funding through SWEEP. And then Jimmy will finish up talking about Hotspot Ag and their eligibility for SWEEP funding as well, and also how Hotspot can help save you time and money on your farm. I want to make a note that we'll take questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, you should see an icon on your screen called Q&A. Feel free to type your questions in there, and I'll make sure to moderate at the end and get most of those questions answered for you. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Ian.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending today, and hopefully we can give you a really good background on the SWEEP program and how you can take advantage of it to make improvements on your farm. So my name is Ian Vietti. I'm the Director of Conservation for Innovative Ag Services in Hanford, California. And I'm also a CCA and TSP that specializes in helping producers basically use incentive programs to improve their farm with the goal of being productive while also protecting the environment. So next slide, Kendall. Okay, so when we talk about SWEEP, if you don't know anything about SWEEP, it is CDFA's program to help improve water and energy efficiency on the farm. Typically, there has been just a application window, sometimes twice a year, but once a year. We closed the 9th funding round, I believe, in last year's, excluding some pilot programs. But this year, there was a bit of a change. For the last round, it used to be a competitive grant process. It's now become a more of a first come first serve. They had a scoring rubric, and as long as you scored more than 30 of 50 points, then your application was accepted and funded. So it really became a system in the last year that you need to be ready and prepared to submit as soon as possible to have the greatest chance for funding. The program was oversubscribed. They had about $43 million and they had over $80 million in requests. Almost 40 million of those requests came during the last 3 weeks, after which almost all the funding had been taken up. So being prepared ahead of time is really important. Now, when we started Tule and Hotspot and I started this, we were expecting them to launch the SWEEP application round in the fall, much like last year. Unfortunately, because they were so oversubscribed and they had so much money for this year, fiscal year, they decided to do a block grant in which they will be funding RCDs, nonprofits, irrigation districts to basically give SWEEP grants, but in a localized setting. So they're supposed to be a little more flexible, a little more custom tuned to each area's needs, because we've seen in things like the South Desert pilot, a lot of their water systems are all gravity. They don't actually use pumping currently, and to go to a sprinkler system from a gravity surface system takes power. Well, two things are required in SWEEP: a greenhouse gas reduction and water savings. water savings was going to be there, but the problem is if you're using gravity and no power and adding a pump, it increases greenhouse gas emissions. So they kind of realize this need and have decided that they want to kind of go to the locals and ask them to help manage it. So this long-winded explanation of the pilot block grant is basically CDFA decided that they aren't going to release the general sweep round, which they manage, until after the pilot program has happened. At this point, they just received and gave feedback on public comment for the block grant. So we're expecting it to launch sometime in the next 2 months. Application windows are typically 60 days, which means that we will not be seeing a general sweep round likely until this fall. Some contacts of mine have insinuated that the governor wants to postpone the program, and publicly I saw news reports that he is asking legislature to claw back 40 of the 110 million that was allocated in the budget because of the deficit that is now showing up. But our best guess is that we're going to be looking at a September, October funding round. Now, this is for general sweep. These block grants could turn around and start funding relatively quickly. It depends on when they close and when they are funded, and then each district or recipient's ability to turn around and implement them. I would guess that August would be the earliest there, but even that is a pretty fast turnaround. I think for both programs, we really need to be looking at about October being ready. But being ready, you're going to want to have everything done by August. Because again, if most of these are going to first come, first serve, like we saw last year, you want to have your project pretty much ready to go when you turn it in. So as we get into the main sweep funding round, typically it's a 60-day application window. As I said, it's probably this fall, could be as soon as July or August, but not as likely. And you're going to want to be ready. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So, couple things to know about sweep. It currently has a $200,000 limit per application per tax ID. There is no match required, and there is a $600,000 tax ID lifetime limit. Now, this has been stated that across both the block grants and CDFA run sweep, it's going to remain the same. So if you've already capped out for your tax ID, you're not going to be able to go to one of the RCDs and then get another 600,000. They're actually going to track across all grant distributions. The block grants, if you are an RCD or irrigation district hoping to take advantage of that, are going to be for $2 to $5 million. They have overhead built in as well as technical service. So it's one of those things that each one will be able to set their own rules. We are expecting them to be at the same $200,000 cap, but some districts may have them lower so they can give out more. That will all kind of be specific to each grant awardee. Other than that, one thing to be cognizant of is if you have multiple tax IDs, you can, under current rules, apply for each one. One thing that also has to be considered is if you make an improvement on a parcel, like if you have a 160-acre parcel and apply for 80 acres of drip irrigation, and then want to go back and do the other 80 in a future sweep round, technically that parcel has been improved, and so you have less of a chance. Under the rules, it actually states that you're not allowed to reapply for the same thing on the same parcel. I think there is a little bit of give there, but if we just go by the RGA, there can be limits. So you have to think about your parcel size and your project. Really, if you're planning on a parcel, you want to try and cover the whole thing if possible. Next slide. Okay, so what can be funded? Basically, if it touches your irrigation system, it can be funded as well as their power sources. So irrigation systems, going from flood to drip, of course, is a favored practice because there's quite a bit of water savings there. But also, if you have older pumps or pumps that don't have VFDs that need energy efficiency improvements, those could be funded items. Conversions from diesel fuel or other natural gas wells to electric are considered highly competitive. Again, you have to have the water savings component, but those greenhouse gases are significantly reduced when you go from a fossil fuel burning pump over to electric. Automation components, anything that you can use to better track and control your water applications are fundable. One thing should be noted that service fees have a 2-year limit and you're expected to operate them for at least 5 years during the grant follow-up. They want to see a lifetime of 10 to 15 years following NRCS standards, but you are obligating yourselves to at least 5 years of subscription service. The other thing that we've seen a lot of awards is solar systems to basically power pumping infrastructure. So we've had a lot of clients be successful with a irrigation system improvement as well as solar to offset their pumping costs with renewable energy. Next slide. The other thing I should mention on that previous slide is they also have had the pilots for the South Desert. So they have considered places that don't have pumps, adding pumps, as well as manure SDI on the dairy. Last year they had a pilot. Basically, they set aside $2 million for just manure SDI. We don't know if they're going to have a sequestered amount of money for that this year, but it is always flood to drip conversion, so it would score well even on a general sweep application. So we can go back to the next slide, Kendall. Thank you. Okay, so meat and potatoes. How do you prepare? The biggest thing you want to do is, know now. Don't wait until they open it up and then go, oh, where should I plan this? When I work with clients on trying to fund projects, I ultimately want to be planning at least a year ahead because of how funding cycles for both CDA and NRCS work, and even some of the other government grants. It is best to really know what you might want to do a year ahead. You can always kind of lay some simple plans. I know that, sometimes I've run into situations with stone fruit where the variety isn't doing well. And so it's kind of a snap decision as soon as you've finished harvest to redevelop. But where possible, you really want to be planning ahead at least a year. As I've said several times over my career, the cost of free government money is always time. So in the context of this, with the move to the first come, first serve situation, the longest things that can occur during a sweep application is getting your bids. Solar usually being the longest right now because of the switch to net metering 3 from net metering 2. I know they are solar companies are heavily impacted because everyone's trying to get their interconnection agreement applications in before the deadline in April, so they are locked in for the next 20 years. Anytime I deal with a solar bid without that situation, I still want to plan 2 to 3 months for them to actually come out, see, do the design. So if you're looking at a solar system, again, now is kind of a good time to be planning, with the exception that until April, they're going to be heavily impacted. They may not get to you until then. Pump tests can also be problematic. One thing that SWEEP requires is a pump test on all pumps attached to the system. That includes boosters and lift pumps. So coordinating that with water runs, with the flood releases we are having right now, we're seeing a lot of these pumps that normally aren't used very often. If there's water in the ditch, it's a good time to get that pump test scheduled so you can get those efficiencies. CDFA has said that pump tests are good for 2 years. You can kind of stretch that to 3 depending. They want a recent pump test because part of the calculations for greenhouse gas reductions require the efficiency of the current situation. It should be noted that that again, every pump attached to the system, even if it's not currently in use, should be tested. Typically, it costs $200 to $400, depends on how many you're doing, how busy they are, and if you are in an area where it is subsidized by the energy company. PG&E has their ADEP program, which cuts the cost. Sometimes you can get it done by SCE or PG&E, and then sometimes there are some RCDs that have grants that allow them to come test for you. One thing to note too about testing is during the summer when the pump is drawing down on the aquifer a little bit heavier, a lot of times we see those pump tests actually reflect better in an application purpose because they are less efficient. In the winter, if we're testing right now, where there's not a lot of pressure, it shows a higher efficiency. But one thing to remember that is, really the more you need help, the more the government is likely to do it. So those summer pump tests, I think, actually reflect better. They kind of show actually the worst situation, and we all, unless you have 100% surface water, you're going to be drawing on that well. So having it reflected in that situation is also honest. It's not something that we have to worry about. Make sure that your pump tester notes the meter or the fuel source on those pump tests. Most testers are really good about that, but every once in a while there'll be some mix up, especially if there's 2 meters and 2 pumps at the same site. And that can be problematic. Especially, it can be frustrating when you're trying to enter all the data in the calculators and then realize you're not sure which pump is which. The other thing you're going to need to do is gather 1 year of energy records. They basically will let you go back 2 irrigation seasons, and you basically, if you have diesel, it's always kind of a trick because a lot of people will have small shuttles and then large storage tank at their yard. Some of that you have to make an estimate, but you want at least your diesel delivery bills. And then you can calculate back based on your burn rate and how many times you fill a smaller tank. Otherwise, you want a year's worth of energy bills or your service statement. And actually, next slide. So either of these things will work. The easiest thing to get is the last 12 months of your bills. But the service print, like you can see on your right, that actually is my preferred way to look at the records. It really allows us to drill down and see how much power is being drawn, and checking that against your well's horsepower to see how efficient it is outside of the efficiency test. So either of these will work. Working with your service rep is always good. SCE is really quick about these. PG&E can take 2 to 3 weeks. So again, it's something that you want to be working ahead of time. You also, if you can gather 2 years, it really allows you to choose which year is more reflective of your actual situation. So next slide. Now, for bidding your system, this is one that you really want to work with your vendors. And it's always best to be upfront that, hey, I want to do this when sweep comes around. Some vendors actually will provide quite a bit of assistance with applying for sweep. So it's best to get on their list early. But also, it's, if you go and bid a project and they think they're going to sell it in 2 weeks, it can cause a little bit of hurt feelings. So explain that, hey, this is for the sweep program. I don't expect it to come out for 6 months. I'm going to need a rebid. So basically, you want to get an updated bid. With COVID and some of the shortages we saw with materials, some of the bids were coming in 40 to 50% over what the initials were. And luckily things have been calming back down. But it's good to be cognizant that a bid you had a year ago or 6 months ago may not reflect current conditions. So ask them to save it in their system. So when it comes time to get that rebid, when they actually launch the program, they can just kind of update pricing and go. It won't be reinventing the wheel. The other thing too is if you're working on this early, you can make revisions. So, it kind of allows you to look at things on your ranch and realize, oh, we could do this, this, and this. If you're rushing, a lot of times I see plans that are kind of just thrown together. They're basic, they work, but afterwards the producer's like, I really wish we had done this and this. Or they go to modify their grant and the CDFA doesn't increase the grant amount to cover the cost. So having your design where you've had a little time to think about it, think about how your farm or ranch operates and what improvements may be beneficial, and working with their vendor really can help out, and they can really help you refine for the long term the system that's going in. As I mentioned earlier, with solar, you need to start as early as possible because of how impacted they are. And the other thing I like to do is ask my vendors to add 20%. Again, if we're getting close where it's going to probably open up in a month, that 20% factor is usually how much we see costs rise from the time you're actually awarded to the time you're allowed to start. So if they open sweep in October of 23, you're not going to be able to start your project till April, May of June of 24. And in that 6-month gap, as you're going through the grant administration process, there often is cost increase. So if I'm going for a maximum grant of $200,000, I really want to plan right now that for a system that costs about 160. That way we know, if costs do go up 20%, and that's pretty typical during a 6-month period, we're going to be kind of in that sweet spot where CDFA is covering the whole grant. We're not getting a $40,000 bill surprise when we go to put it in. Next slide. So the process for applying is, there is an online system that CDFA had developed as they've gone through various iterations of the SWEEP program. Um, I did see some stuff. It does look like they may be going to Amplifund in the future. Hopefully for CDFA managed sweep, they don't. It is a little more frustrating system compared to the one they currently use. I believe the block grants will be going through that. So that is something, if you, again, you're an irrigation company that are interested for the block grant, you may want to start, begin your familiarity with Amplifund because it can be a bit frustrating at times. There are several Excel and PDF documents that need to be prepared as part of a sweep application. So this is where a lot of producers end up contacting me and asking for my help, is when they get to the calculators in Excel. If you're not familiar with Excel, they can be a little daunting and kind of frustrating. So if you're comfortable in Excel and working with macros, then it shouldn't be an issue, but it is something to be aware of. The other thing too is you need to basically create a bunch of combined documents. A lot of times that requires Adobe PDF or some of the third-party online tools. So as as our older generation has started really applying, a lot of them have found it frustrating that it's not like an easy printout. You just fill it in handwriting. There are electronic documents that are required. So it is something that you will have to either work with someone or be familiar with. Luckily, CDFA does provide their technical assistance providers, not privately, but through the UC and some nonprofits. They fund them every year. They can help you with those. And then there are third-party people like myself that actually will do this for you as well. The documents that you are going to have are that GHG calculator, the budget spreadsheet, the water savings worksheet, then your bids, designs, and your pump test. And it does require some descriptive writing. The public comment response to the block grant indicated that the GHG calculator and water savings worksheet will be in part of all those block grants. Their application process could be different though. They may be streamlined. So until those grants are written and released, we're not going to be sure how all the block grants will be distributed at the farm level. I don't expect them to be more difficult though than CDFAs. If anything, they'll be streamlined and you'll be getting the support of those agencies to help apply. So if we go to the next slide, when I say descriptor, when you're applying with CFA, a lot of times the first round of review is someone that is reading, hundreds of these. And so it's best to be descriptive about what you're doing, not just I want to put drip irrigation on my 18 acres of citrus. If you see the example, this actually was a clip of one of my grants that was funded during the last round. And in the narrative, I'm explaining what we're doing, what the water sources are, the energy sources. Basically, if there were no maps, there were no designs, they should be able to read this and understand what I'm trying to accomplish. There are going to be several prompts through the application process. Typical when I apply for a sweep grant, I typically write between 2,000 and 2,500 words. So I found that in previous iterations, a lot of times people were not successful because they weren't really putting enough text. They, said, I want a drip system. And that just didn't tell CDFA enough when they compared it to things like this on the previous slide. Next slide. So time commitment. It's about 10 hours to fill out the application, another 10 hours to go through your time or your worksheets and calculators, refine them, make sure everything is correct, and about 10 hours for information gathering. Now, it's not something that you can sit down 3 days in a row usually and bang out. The average time to gather all that data is about 3 weeks. It's going to be back and forth with contractors, your vendors. This stuff doesn't just fly together. Pump tests. I have been in situations where we've gotten pump tests next day because they just happen to be available. Last summer, I had one vendor that did a lot of the pump tests. He was about 6 weeks out. So depending on how busy they are, it can, these things can take time. And that really comes back to the whole focus on this. Being prepared now helps increase your chances for success later. So next slide. So how to be selected? This is kind of the one that everyone wants to know. Unfortunately, now it's kind of speed is king. So being ready is going to be key. It used to focus a little more on the water savings and greenhouse gas reductions plus your disadvantage status. I do think that the this first come first serve system helped equalize that, but at the same time, I'm a little worried that the pendulum swung a little too much and that CDFA is going, okay, we don't want we want the best projects, not just ones that can get in and get over the bare minimum. So, again, focusing on the quality of your project is going to be important. If you have less than 10% water savings, I'm worried that in this round, you may not cut it. So there are basically, aside from converting your irrigation system or converting your crop to a less water use crop, there are 3 tools, and this is where both Kendall with Tule and Jimmy with Hotspot come in. If you don't have a flow meter currently and add one, that's a 5% water savings. If you add soil moisture sensors on top of that, it's another 5%. And if you add some sort of ET measurement, like the Thule sensors, that is basically another 5%. So you can get 15% water savings on your current system just by going to some advanced technology for water management. In addition, that also automatically in the calculators shows a water savings. So it's not typical where we just see people throw in sensors. We usually see some energy improvements as well. But it's one of those things that you have to be pretty honest with yourself. If your ranch is pretty efficient already, you may be in a situation where this year it's going to be more challenging. The block grants, we don't know yet. Each district is supposed to have local flexibility. So we'll have to wait and see. They may actually do smaller grants where you're just looking at, $10,000 for automation or something smaller, and it may be less competitive and less arduous to apply. Unfortunately, that's a crystal ball thing, and I just don't have the answers. So next slide. So One thing you want to be absolutely familiar with is the CDFA sweep website. It has all the tools available from previous rounds, so you can download them, take a look, play in the calculator, see if you're comfortable with it. You also will see releases like I mentioned earlier. I read the public comment response to the block grants that was released last week. That gives a pretty good indication on where they're going to want to go with these block grants. So getting into that data and really kind of just kind of digging through it. That's how I spend a lot of my time, figuring out, okay, what is their goal? So then I can turn around and tell my clients, this is how to best apply and utilize it. So CDFA sweep website, that is absolutely one you want to be familiar with. That's where it will launch the program. It'll have links to the application when it goes live. So, and then I have my contact information there. I'm always available to give advice or recommendations, as well as assist with full service application. So next slide. With that, I want to say thank you, and I'm going to hand it back to Kendall. I'll be around and answering questions at the end of this.
Thanks, Ian. Helpful as always. We already have a lot of questions lined up for you for the end. So I just want to restate, if you have a question, be sure to click on the Q&A icon, type your question in, and we'll be sure to get to all of them at the end. And a couple people have already asked if this recording will be made available. This webinar is being recorded. I will send it out. If you want to make absolutely sure, though, that you receive it, be sure to send me an email, kendall@tule.ag. I'm the one that you've been getting emails from already anyway as you register. But if you want to get the link to this, be sure to email me and just send me a little reminder, and I can respond to you directly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Tule. We are newly a part of CropX, and we offer 2 different technologies that are eligible for funding through SWEEP. Both of these technologies help growers know how much to irrigate. One is an ETA sensor, the other is a soil moisture sensor, and they both help growers make irrigation decisions. What we find most of the time is that when growers use these tools, a vast majority of the time, it helps them save water and improve water use efficiencies. So that is why they are eligible for funding through CDFA's SWEEP program. I'm going to spend the majority of my time focusing on the Tule sensor. I'm sure many of you are already very familiar with soil moisture sensors. I will get into that a little bit, but the Tule sensor is a little bit more unique. So I want to talk about it more in depth. And what the Tule sensor does is it measures actual ET. So I want to give a little bit of time to give background on ET and the types of ET. So let's go back in time to grade school science class and talk about evapotranspiration. Last week at the farm show, someone said that ET is basically a plant sweating or a field sweating. And it's the process of evaporation from plant and soil surfaces, as well as from within plant tissues. And in most modern ag systems, you've got a little bit of deep percolation, you've got a little bit of runoff, but most of the water leaving your field is leaving through evapotranspiration. Now, I'm sure that you're all familiar with the term ET, but what we may not realize is that there are different types of ET, and not all ETs are created equal. So if you get data from CIMMYS, from a CIMMYS station, that's the most basic level of ET that you can look at. So that's the total water use of a well-watered lawn. One step up from that is crop ET, ETC, and that's the crop water use of a crop type. So if you have a weather station out in your field, you're most likely getting data about crop ET, and it's a little bit more specific. The most specific type of ET information that you can get is called actual ET, and that's the actual water use of one very specific field. And Tule is the only commercially available technology that measures it. There are a couple different tools that the research world uses, but Tule sensors is the only way that a farmer can collect that data. So we know about ET, we know about the different types of ET. Why should you care? Well, if you understand the exact amount of water that your crop is using, you can irrigate best to that crop's needs. And when you start to irrigate to actual ET, there's a lot of benefits. The vast majority of the time, when growers start irrigating to ETA, they're using less water. So they're using less pumping and energy. When there's less humidity in a field, and when a plant is happy and healthy and not water stressed, that leads to a lot of disease prevention and lower disease counts. That leads to better yields. When a plant is using water most efficiently, it's also able to uptake nutrients most efficiently. So you're not wasting any of that fertigation or fertilizers. All of that put together, higher yield. So a lot of benefits to irrigating to exact crop water needs. So, as I mentioned, Tule sensors are the only commercially available technology that measures actual ET. Here's exactly what they deliver. Actual evapotranspiration, so how much water your crop is using in your field every day in real time. You're not getting ET data a month later like you might be with a GSA. It's every day in real time. We also monitor crop water stress. We have a pressure switch that tracks real-time irrigations, and we take all of that information and bundle it up into an irrigation suggestion that you can take a look at as you make your irrigation decisions. So here's what each of those pieces looks like. So here we have actual ET measurement. This is an almond orchard, and you'll see every single day they're using less than 1/4 of an inch of water. But you'll see that, and then the blue bars are irrigation events. Growers get to set their own target water stress levels. So here again is an almond grower. You see up until July, they didn't want their trees to be that stressed. But as soon as whole split hits, they want to stress them a little bit more and get a nice, even, uniform whole split. So you can really monitor stress levels that way. And you can define what you want those stress levels to be. That's that teal band. That's why you see at the beginning of July, you see the teal band get a little bit wider because they want to stress those trees a little bit more. You also see the blue bars of irrigation events. And you can see as soon as the trees are irrigated, that line goes up, they're less stressed. And then you see the line go down as the trees dry down. So it's a really easy visual. As I mentioned, we have the inline pressure switch, and that just monitors irrigation events. We want to know when you're putting on water so that you can add that as a factor too when you're making your irrigation decisions. Recently, we just added some push notifications that allow growers to be notified when water has been running a little bit too long, or maybe it's been too long since they've gotten water. You can set up those notifications. I know probably many of you have sat up in the middle of the night and thought, did I get the water off or not? And you can check the app and tell, or we'll send you a push notification. You can also download an irrigation report at the end of the season and see all your irrigations over the course of the season so that it will help you plan more for next year. Finally, the suggestions. So we know how much water your crop is using. We know how stressed it is. We know how much water you've applied to it. We take all that. We know what target stress level you want your crop to be at. We take all that information and we make a suggestion of how much water you might want to put on over the next 7 days to keep your crop within that target stress level. And you can use that as you make your own irrigation decisions that can just factor in. There's a few different ways you can interact with Tule. So first is a weekly email that you'll get every Monday. It's just a snapshot of what's going on in your fields. I mentioned the iPhone app. This is where you can set up your alert notifications. And then the web dashboard is where you can access the most detailed information and download any reports. So that's Tule. Those are the Tule ETA sensors. And now I'm going to talk just for a minute about the CropX soil sensors. So they measure not only soil moisture, but they also collect data on temperature and electrical conductivity. They've got a built-in telemetry and power source, so you don't need other devices. They're incredibly easy to install. It takes 5 minutes to put the sensor in yourself, and a very simple to use web platform that comes with that. So what we like to say at Tule is if you've got the soil moisture sensor and the ETA sensor, you've got a full picture of field water use from roots to shoots. So you have the best data available to help you make irrigation decisions and help you save water. And they're both eligible for funding through SWEEP grants. So you all already have my personal email address. If you've got any additional questions after the webinar today, you're welcome to reach out to me. Otherwise, if you want to learn more about Tule sensors or CropX soil sensors, you can contact info@tule.ag. You can go to our website to learn more, or we always love just a phone call. Give us a call anytime. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Jimmy with Hotspot.
All right. Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, Ian. And thanks to everyone for joining today. My name is James Nichols. I'm the president of Hotspot Ag, and going to share a little bit about what we do. Next slide. So Hotspot Ag was a company that formed out of my family's farm. When I came back to the family farm in 2013, was tasked with a project to get a better understanding of how much water we were applying to our farm. And over the years, got good at installing telemetry out in the field. 2015, installed our first Tule technology sensor in the field, which really reshaped our understanding of crop water needs. And a few years later, after some success in yield improvement, tree health improvement, wanted to build a platform to easily execute an AT schedule. And so first commercial installations went in 2019, and now we are up and down the state in California. And so what we provide growers is real-time communication to every single device in the field, pumps and valves, have a secure cloud connection. So everything that we're monitoring in the field can be brought up on our website, have 10-minute logging. Next slide, Kendall. So we have a very configurable platform, can create different dashboards for different users. This is an example of what the website looks like out in the field. Next slide. And about 18 months ago, moved into our new facility, and we have a training center where we bring in new and existing customers to train on the features that are available within our platform. Next slide. So this is a list of the current applications that we provide with Hotspot. The green are what are included or applicable, to SWEEP, but like to touch on a few other applications while we're on here. We just released a fertigation skid, so we can provide growers it's a variable fertigation skid, so growers can put out specific amounts of fertilizer during the irrigations, do weather monitoring, chill accumulation, can also remotely control and monitor diesel engines for both pumps and wind machines, and then can also help growers save money through time of use avoidance. One of the neat features that is really helpful for a lot of growers is the automated off-peak reservoir fill. So if you have reservoirs, the concept here is that we help keep the reservoirs filled for irrigation events. But for today's presentation, just going to talk a little bit more about the pump and valve automation, energy monitoring. We have a integration with Tule technology, so it can bring their recommendation tool into our platform to help know what to do, and then also talk about the branch level water accounting. The next slide. So as Ian described, the applicable goals for SWEEP are: 1, decrease water usage and greenhouse gas emissions. Lastly, one of the things that needs to be done is you have to record both the water and energy use post-project in case of an audit. Next slide. And so, within the definition that SWEEP uses for water savings, the goal here is to make the application strongest is to get to the intense management. And so that's volumetric management using soil, water, and ET information. And so with the combination of Tule technologies and our tool, in our tools, we can provide growers the tools to make a very strong application. And next slide. And just to give kind of a picture of what the tool, those tools look like on our interfaces, we bring in the Tule technologies recommendation on top, and combined with our irrigation scheduler, it really checks all the boxes that SWEEP is looking for really effective water management. So within our tool, within our tool, we plug in irrigation designs, how much water you run per hour, and then combined with the pump capacity at the ranch, can really get an insight of how much water is being applied and if you can actually meet the plan for the week. Next slide. And so applicable for the post project, but also just good information to have at the ready. We have a ranch level irrigation summary where we're capturing inches and hours, inches and hours, and for the vines, we can actually express that as gallons per plant as well. Next. And so, just to touch on one other thing that Ian said, that pump tests are required for the SWEEP application. And so one of the tools that we provide that comes standard with our pump installations is energy monitoring. And so we have a couple of different metrics that we can use. When combined with the groundwater monitor, we can actually record pump efficiency in real time. If you just have a flow meter and the energy monitoring, we can measure the energy efficiency of the pump, which gives really good insight into which pumps to run to fill reservoirs, but also to know if there's trouble coming ahead with the pump. Next slide. And then, not sure how many of you have had to go onto the SCE or PG&E website to get a summary of how much energy has been used. But our the widgets within our software, you can easily configure configure the widgets to show energy in both weekly, monthly, or yearly statements. So next slide. So yeah, we have 2 offices in California, one in Hanford and the other in Santa Rosa. So if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to any of our customer success managers. The next slide. So yeah, wanted to say thank you for Ian and Kendall for putting this together, and we'll open it for questions now.
Thanks, Jimmy. We do have a lot of questions. Ian's been hard at work answering some already, but I want to make sure that the group gets the answer to some of these, because I'm sure some of you share the same thoughts. So one was, do we know when block grant recipients' application deadlines to farmers will be? Ian's going to answer that one live.
All right, there we go. So in short, we're not sure. As I read the draft RGA for the block grants, it's going to be unique to each block grant recipient. So I am guessing, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think any of them could be funded and turn around and start awarding these things before August at the absolute earliest. In reality, I think we're going to be looking at October, November timeframe. Every part of the application process they will have to prepare how they are going to have applicants apply, how they're going to be reviewed, basically all the nitty gritty of putting together a pass-through grant. So this fall is probably the earliest, and by next fall, I think they'll be obligated to be distributing the grants. So it's probably going to be 6 months to a year. That's going to be the average time frame.
Okay. Ian, what's your best guess for when the block grant application period will open?
I think it's going to be open in the next 30 to 60 days. The biggest indicator will be if they release a second draft for public comment. But typically, as I've seen, you see the comments are from public comment, CDFA's answers come out, and then 30 days or so, we see the launch of the new program. So it'll probably be an application window of 60 days. And so I'm guessing next 30 to 60 days, we'll see it. It'll be a 60-day application window unless they go a short 45, so they can have it done by the end of fiscal 23 for California.
Okay. This person has a vineyard that's currently on flood irrigation, but the vineyard's old. So can they use sweep funds to replace irrigation with a drip? And if they do they have to keep that vineyard for 5 years, or can they replant?
So as I wrote, you can replant, you can redevelop with sweep grant, especially if you're going from a high, we're seeing a lot of walnut guys come out of walnuts now and go to alternative crops. So redevelopment is absolutely allowed under sweep, at least by current rules. In this specific vineyard situation, you will have to maintain the system. So you don't want to put in a brand new, $100,000 drip system and then tear it up because you're ripping the vineyard out. So if you're just replanting vines and can save the system, it shouldn't be an issue. As I mentioned, if you think you're going to pull out that varietal or plant something else, it's best to actually plan your grant around redevelopment. The other thing too is typically, as I mentioned, they won't fund the same practice. So if you rip it out and decide to go to almonds, you're not going to be able to turn around and then get another sweep grant for an almond drip system. So it's kind of best to plan to have the system in for a long period of time.
One person wants to know if they can use 2 different technologies that kind of give the same information, and if they would both be funded and qualify. Answers yes. So if you want to use soil moisture sensors and an ET sensor, both would qualify, right, Ian?
Yeah, that is correct. The one thing is I would be very cautious if you're looking at doing flow meter plus soil moisture sensors, then something like a dendrometer or a stem water potential, one of those sensors, or the fruit sensors. You really, to play it safe, it's well worth the investment of adding that ET technology to your application. That way, because it's pretty clear that ET is what they consider level 3 IWM. Um, the plant sensors can take the place. Kendall hopefully isn't going to yell at me too much, but for the purposes of application, I think combining that and then adding that ET monitoring on top is the safe route to go.
Can funding be used for additional ET sensors and or soil moisture probes?
So yes, it can, but you have to make a pretty good argument to get that water savings in the calculation tool. So if you have a 100-acre block and you have 5 soil types ranging from sand to sandy loam to a clay loam, then you can make an argument, if you have a single soil moisture sensor in the clay loam, that your irrigation sets in the other soil types are not going to be watered too efficiently, because that clay loam is going to take less water and you're going to have more water losses on those sandy loams, and they're going to need more frequent irrigation. So if your application revolves around, hey, I'm going to, rather than 100-acre set, it's going to be broken into 20 acres by soil type, and we're going to have monitoring in each soil type to make sure that we're irrigating efficiently, then yes, you can add on those sensors. Same thing with the ET sensors. So ET, if it's different crops, or varietals, or different even like peaches that are early versus late season, you can make somewhat of an argument. Or if your ranches are far apart, if you're 5 or 6 miles away in some different thermocline areas, those sort of things can be used to have repeated technologies.
Great. Is it possible to apply directly through CDFA, or do we have to apply through our local RCD or block grant recipient?
Yeah, so this year the block grant is a pilot. I actually think it will be beneficial, as you will probably be able to apply to both and have a chance for funding multiple times. So say the RCD block grant is out first, you apply there, you're not funded, and then you've applied to CDFA and you're picked up there. It just it gives you another chance if you have an RCD in your area that has a block grant. As of right now, though, you will be able to apply to both, or either or. You're not going to be forced one direction.
Can windmills be funded to replace frost sprinkler systems?
So this is I've been tilting at windmills for several years with NRCS about this, and the air board as well. We have a lot of older windmills that are older diesel engines, that there are better natural gas, tier 4 diesel, or even electric systems now, and no one's really had a good funding source for them. As I mentioned in my written comment, that could be a novel block grant, like if a industry nonprofit, CCM, someone like that put together a block grant application, they might have a shot. I don't think as an individual grower under the current rules, there's an opportunity there. And again, my one thing is, if you're getting funded windmills, they're going to want to make sure that you're not still running water. So, because a lot of people use both or they switch, CDFA could go all or nothing. I think currently it's a long shot, even if an industry group went after a block grant, but it, I think, has some potential.
Okay. Does the Tule ETA sensor data appear on a different app than the CropX soil moisture probe? Good question. As of now, yes, it's 2 different apps, 2 different platforms, but that's changing. within the next few months. They'll be integrated into one app, one platform. We'll keep you updated on that, but we expect within the next few months, certainly by the time you get funding for these projects, they'd be on the same platform. I have a 30-acre farm. How many ETA sensors and CropX sensors do you recommend to install? So short answer to that is it depends. With the Thule sensors, they directly measure up to 3 acres of a field. What we recommend is 1 sensor per irrigation management block. So if you've got 2 blocks that you irrigate differently, or if they're trees and they're very different ages, we'd recommend a sensor per. If it's 1 30-acre block and it's all the same, then you could get away with just 1 sensor. It really just depends on what your situation is. Same with CropX soil moisture sensors. It depends on your soil profile within the coverage of that 30 acres. But that's something that you would go over with one of our sales reps and really find the best fit for you. Does Thulean Hotspot work well for row crops, melons, veg, etc.? Answer for Thule is yes, absolutely. Answer for Hotspot?
Yes, it works well for row crops. I will say in the row crops where there's where the drip is buried underground, we have a very cool tool. It's the application rate analysis, where we can monitor flow rates to each block, and so we can detect plugging or big leaks in real time.
Another question for Ian. Can you provide any fee estimates for helping me through applying for SWEEP?
So I certainly can. Please reach out to me by my contact information. I don't really share that here simply because I'm not here to drum up business, basically educate. So, and also I encourage everyone to utilize the CDFA TAPs, especially if you are considered a disadvantaged or minority farmer. The level of assistance that they provide is actually quite considerable and is free. So yes, absolutely. Please contact me and I can kind of walk you through what I charge. But for today, this is just as educational. I also should mention that my advice is always free. So feel free to contact me and ask me questions. It's not something I charge for.
This person's farm has 2 parcels. Could they apply for 2 separate grants for each parcel in separate funding rounds?
Yes. Where you can get a little tricky is if you have a shared water source between the 2 parcels. If you have 1 well on the 2 parcels, it gets a little trickier, but not insurmountable. The other thing too is if you look at ownership, potentially can have 1 application for or 2 applications for the same round. So if you manage it through a separate entity, then you own it. Both entities could apply on their respective parcels. The cleanest way would be, of course, if there is a separate well on each parcel and the irrigation systems are segregated, then that's a real clean, straightforward, either 1 or 2 year application process. So it's just the one situation is if they share a single water source or system, it's best to do them all in a single application.
Ian, are row crops eligible for SWEEP because of the annual biannual turnover?
Yes, they are. Row crops are eligible. Unfortunately, the calculator tool only allows for a single crop. This is where, again, that narrative becomes important. I've had some row crops in the past that we actually converted to trees, and to show that there wouldn't be an increase in water use, is we had to run the calculator twice and explain it all in the narrative. I'm hoping they revise that to allow to put 2, but I don't think it's going to happen. The key thing is you have to show the water savings. And if you're going from a flood to drip situation, it's always going to generally improve it, at least within the calculator tool. Now, the other thing is you can also pick which one you're representing. So it makes sense to run the calculator tool twice and select the one that uses more water. It then shows a greater water savings.
Excellent. I think this is our last question. Is the AGI requirement still less than $900,000?
So AGI requirement is an NRCS limitation. CDFA has not established the same income requirements as NRCS. So I am aware of several clients that have considerably more AGI than 900,000 that qualify for the program. CDFA at this point has not put those limitations, so corporations based in California can apply, and again, farmers that make more than that.
Excellent. That was it for questions. For those of you still on the line, just remember, you'll probably get a follow-up email after this webinar is over. It will have my personal email address on there. If you've got any more questions, or if you want me to put you in touch with Jimmy or Ian, feel free to always reach out. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you learned a lot today, and good luck with your sweep applications.